And you have other guys coming up and on board, and I was listening to an extremely interesting lecture in the Nurope setting yesterday, and I came to think about the Hegelian way of understanding the art system, as you would term it. And this is, I would say, more a Schelling way. This guy is Schelling. And as you know, Hegel, Schelling, and Hölderlin were sharing digs once upon a time in Tübingen. And they were not friends for the whole life, okay? So, but this is, anyways. So what I'm saying is, understanding what goes on in this field of schwung, in this field of play, understanding what artists seem to contribute. Others may do it as well, of course, but the artists seem to be, during these 200 years, those contributors. We have the same kind of proposition by Michelangelo Pistoletto, by the way. To understand this, you have, or a possible way is to connect to these discourses with these guys that are actually talking about this. Other things too, but they are sort of explicitly speaking. You have Nietzsche, Schelling, I'm suggesting some, and probably you have your own ones around here, or your own favorites. And finally, we have an American. Yes, we have an American who is here, and this American is John Dewey. And John Dewey is known as the pedagogical, the teaching, one of the founders of Teachers College in Columbia, and someone who wrote a marvelous little book on art as experience, saying that what happens in art, what happens in this schwung and playful situation, is that people get carried away by coming into this field of attraction. And by getting carried away by this, they break up what he called, and later on Pete Seeger, I think, made a song about the small boxes. They get out, what you call today, out of the box. And they get out of the box, and hell knows how you get out of the box. Suddenly you are out of the box, and you enjoy it plentifully. And to John Dewey, this getting out of the box was one of the most important things in order to preserve what he was obsessed with, in a sense, was the democracy that he had his hope for in America. So getting out of the box, you did it by what? By experience, art as experience. Okay. So now I'm back in my own chicken soup broth here, and we have four guys that could sort of help us, guide us, and also, when we get into them, complicate the picture a lot. Dewey, Nietzsche, Schelling, and Kant. And again, we are back to the model. But isn't it fantastic when you go to a firm or you go to a corporation, and you ask them, how did this start? And they tell you a history and so on. I think that's what our friends in communication are sort of helping people to bring out the histories and sort of formulate the histories. Now, the kind of histories we have are in this world of artists creating their own social sculpture, are histories when they can actually paint. A guy can say, this is 3 kilos of butter on a chair. That's how it started. What do you mean? Started? What do I mean? 3 kilos of butter on a chair. That's how it started, the whole Freie Universität, the whole Green Party, what went on and so on. This is the concrete sort of material business plan. And you have this. When you find Christo going on. We had this morning a marvelous lecture by a guy who said, I am in my own artwork. I am trapped in my own artwork. Okay, this is my life. There's only one life and one artwork, and I'm leaving it. That Christo and Jean-Claude, they are perhaps inside there. Who knows? But anyway, that is how it's. When you want to show what the gates, you want to see the gates. When you want to show the Reichstag with all this kind of complex engineering work and PR work and political lobbying work and so on. What is the business plan? Business plan. That's what it is. And this, now you start to see the people all around as sort of part of this. These are pictures taken around the Reichstag. And even further on, you could say it started like that. That's how it started. This is the archive. We talked about archives. This is the archive, and out in this, from these archives came this kind of energy boom that sort of kept the schwung going and made it possible to realize things in the future, 20, 30, 40 years later, that have an enormous impact and that have this background. What can we learn about this for running projects, for making things in the world that has quite a demand or a necessity to make things in various ways, especially ethical ways? Okay. So, what I'm doing now, and these are to the management friends, so to speak, you have this model. And you can expand it, you can toy with it, you can play with it, you can say, design, is it art or design? This kind of big discussion. Or is it the technician, is it production, or the audience, is it consumption, and the critic, when the critics are doing things, when you write things when you have the seminars, when you go and arrange this kind of forum for discussion, to open up a new discussion, what is this? And again, you can expand in many directions. You can go to the art, what does the artist and me, and these are of course things that our artist friends are working in every day. But maybe we should also, we who sit in the managerial position, we who are in the business school, and they say, business has to be innovative and new things has to come. Maybe we should learn something from the artist. So back again, and here we have Schiller and the Schwung, and other people one could throw in. And dichotomies one could think about. And worlds of finance, management, media, culture, and how they connect. And what happens in the art? How are things received? What is the interpretation of the artwork? This is an interpretation of the Reichstagverhüllung. This is an interpretation made by someone selling, I think it was telephones or household appliances or something, and this was the interpretation of the Schuhseller. And this is the interpretation of the brewer. This is not criticism, what is that? Okay, you got the picture. I started out my little trip with boys, went back, Schiller, hooked on to Kant, realized that the whole kind of continental European, not analytical philosophy necessarily, I'm not against, but this is not the world that opens up. The world that opens up is a kind of continental philosophical world we are, I presume most of us in this room, part of, whether we want or not. And this makes it possible for us to articulate this. Now, what are the problems with this? Huge problems, of course. Because suppose, and the strange thing is that art, when we introduce art in existing business schools, it usually gets thrown out because it's taken not seriously, not at the heart of management, not at the heart of entrepreneurship. It's thrown out when people realize we have to do a little more accounting, we must have some time for financial calculus, and what about the marketing technique, and do you speak about branding and so on, and you find yourself with a curriculum where art is shortened like that. You bring in a funny artist to have an evening talk, and then it's over. But I'm not suggesting that, of course. I'm suggesting that this is actually the heart of it. But if you do that, you have to take it seriously and have to look at all the enormous problems and all the piles of corpses that has actually been shaped by this kind of extremely powerful sort of activity. So, there are problems with it. And one problem is what I would call banalization. And I would call that with, you have the one who sort of desperately thought that the end of art was dead. Some other people are thinking that, but this one made a drawn consequence. It was Guillet de Monthoux in la Société du Spectacle. He thought that it was all over, and the only possibility was to go into the bottle, and he got into the bottle and then he died.